Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, holiday spectacular, Thanksgiving cornucopia. You can use whatever word salad you'd like to try and get you through the holiday. First and foremost, though, I want to thank all of you, our loyal listeners, who have been with us all college football season long. It's the culmination of the regular season before we start playing for keeps, and we have something special in store to get you through a massive 60-plus game slate with everybody around these parts. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, going to be joined by Brad Powers and Payne Insider, but given the nature of the holiday, going to do things a little bit differently than what we've grown accustomed to. I know each of the last couple of years, it's been the three of us kind of kicking around some of the marquee matchups, breaking down the NFL, taking BP out of his comfort zone to try and provide a little bit of a unique perspective. But I think for this episode, it made a lot of sense. We decided for all of us to stay in our respective lanes and try and give all of you guys and girls the best perspective we possibly could on all of the games. So without further ado, rather than sandbagging around these parts, although, you know what, I'm going to do a little bit of that before I kick it over to BP with something very special he's got in store for you. College football playoff. We got the reveal. We have a slight indication of what the field of 12 could look like, but I think it makes a hell of a lot more sense for us to break it down in earnest once the regular season is in the books. The one thing that stood out to me, the amount of emphasis that the committee has given to some of these ACC teams. Now, whether it's to build up the resume of Miami, that maybe the Hurricanes would get into the playoff with a loss against SMU in the conference championship game, should they take care of business against Syracuse remains to be seen. We know SMU has already punched its ticket to Charlotte, and don't look now, but the Clemson Tigers somehow, some way, very much in the discussion, although they will have their hands full with South Carolina. And I think the other big winner last weekend, you look at Boise State. It's something that we wouldn't have said before the season, that a team running the table in the Mountain West, going 12-1, assuming the Broncos can win the conference championship game against UNLV or Colorado State, to have a bye in the opening round, making that number 5 spot a hell of a lot more coveted. But like I said, more on that when I get the boys here to offer some perspective. So BP, the floor is yours, my friend, and I'm sure our listeners are really going to enjoy this Thanksgiving feast you're about to provide for them in the college football realm.
All right, here we go. Final week of the regular season for college football is upon us. 67 line games on the board. A couple MAC games going as I'm recording this. Solo, Brad Powers with you, in case you didn't know. Todd and Payne are recording the NFL podcast with it being Thanksgiving week. But we have the largest board in college football history as far as FBS versus FBS games. Not a single team has a bye. We got 65 matchups. I am going to cover all of them solo. 65 games, excluding the Tuesday games. I'm going to try to get to all of them in under an hour. So I got my work cut out for me here. Got my glass of water. At the very end, Todd will give you guys your best bet of the week as far as college football. And again, both Todd and Payne are recording the NFL as I'm recording college. And I'm just going to do this old school style. It's what we call a rundown show. I'm going to go in rotation order for you old school guys. We're going to start with the Thanksgiving game with Memphis and Tulane, work our way down through Black Friday games, Saturday games, all the rivalries, you name it. I'll cover every single game. A lot of games I'm not going to have much on as far as value or even notes. Some of the games like Ohio State or Michigan I'll spend a little bit more time on. But without further ado, let's get to it. Memphis, Tulane starts the bidding here. Tulane, really good this season, to say the least. Both teams off a bye. Tulane has the American Championship game on deck. Tulane, speaking of being good this season, how about 9-2 against the spread? Average cover of 13.5 points per game. That's the best mark in the country. And right now in my power ratings, I think they're the best group of 5 team in the country. I'd have them a 2-point favorite over Boise on a neutral right now. Green Wave 10th in yards per game margin, 7th in scoring margin. To me, as far as this game against Memphis, they have the better coach. They played the tougher schedule than Memphis. Not surprised. A little bit of the early week money is on Tulane. This opened as low as 11. We got out to 14, a little bit of 14.5, but a little bit of Memphis money has shown here. You know what? Where am I at on the game? My ratings have it 13.5, so no bet at current. But certainly a game worth watching on Thanksgiving because I think Tulane's really legit, and obviously got a Memphis team sitting there at 9-2. Also, a top 5, top 6 group of 5 team this season. To Black Friday we go. We'll start off with some MAC games here. Ball State at Ohio. Ohio laying 15 here. Ohio is in the MAC championship game with a win and would play the winner of the Miami Bowling Green game. The Bobcats, remarkable season. Tim Albin's their coach. They only returned 5 starters. Number 130 in my experience rankings this offseason. So for them to get an opportunity to play for the MAC championship game, pretty surprising to say the least. Meanwhile, Ball State, their opponent, just playing out the season. They got an interim coach. They're number 130 in yards per play margin. I lean Ohio in this game. Over's been a really good play in Ball State games. If you've been paying attention, they've gone over by an average of 11.5 points per game on average this season. So I'll probably prefer the over 52.5. But do check the weather. And speaking of the weather, it looks like it could be a factor in some of these games, particularly in Ohio over the weekend, including the Ohio State-Michigan game. So I'll mention it from time to time in case you forget. Speaking of Ohio games in the MAC, Miami Ohio Bowling Green. Pretty simple. Winner of this game goes to the MAC championship game. Miami, better team in yards per play margin. Played a tougher schedule. Windy and freezing conditions again are expected here. But I think most important, and I don't know if it's fully priced in yet, but Bowling Green has an outstanding tight end. Harold Fandon Jr. is his name. He leads the nation in receiving. Not for tight ends, for all receivers. Wide receivers, tight ends, you name it. Leads the nation. He's a game-time decision. He is BG's offense. If he can't go, you got to like Miami, Ohio. Not only plus the 2.5, you think you sprinkle a little bit of money line here. So that's one to keep an eye on as we get closer to Friday. Again, I'm recording this on a Tuesday evening. Next up, Oklahoma State, Colorado. Colorado laying 16.5 right now. Boy, you want to talk. I'm going to mention a few of these from time to time because it's unbelievable the disparity between what the number was in the summer compared to what it is now. This line was Oklahoma State -3 in the summer. So we got nearly a 3-touchdown swing here. Colorado's 8-game cover streak came to an end last week. Kansas ran all over them. No longer Colorado controls their destiny in the Big 12 race. Looks like Arizona State, Iowa State, BYU are all ahead of them in the pecking order. At least the favorites win there. Good news is Travis Hunter's a -800 favorite now to win the Heisman. So looks like Colorado's going to get their first Heisman winner in 30 years. Oklahoma State, you want to talk about a tough season. This is the worst team Mike Gundy's had since he's been there the last couple of decades. They've lost 8 straight games. They've only covered 1 of them in the process. I don't see much value, though. That's a pretty big number. And, boy, Oklahoma State didn't move the football with the young quarterback last week against Texas Tech, so pass from me there. Next up, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Winner of the game, Paul Bunyan's Axe. I love this time of year as far as the rivalries go. This is one of them. The two teams have been split the last 6 meetings. Wisconsin dominated for a while. They're 14 in a row. But, again, since P.J. Fleck came to town, they split out the last 6. Badgers really need this one badly, particularly their head coach, Luke Fickell. They need a win to get the bowl eligibility. Minnesota's been the better team in the stats. Looked really good last week against Penn State. That was a missed opportunity. Probably should have saw that as a possible upset. Just didn't think they could run the football consistently enough and didn't need to. They, were right there until the bitter end against Penn State, who was aggressive as far as 4th down calls. Speaking of Wisconsin, though, on the other side, major disappointment this season. Fickell fired his OC deservedly. He's got to get the OC hire right this time as far as the future. I'm kind of meandering here because I don't see much value. I mean, it's sitting at Wisconsin favored by 2.5. That's right around where my ratings are, power ratings on the game are, so pass. I haven't bet it. Boise State, Oregon State, the next game. College football playoff rankings just came out. Boise State's up to 11, so they would actually, and they're ranked ahead of the Big 12, all the Big 12 teams, so they actually would get a bye if the season ended today. Boise State's your 4 seed getting a bye in the playoff. They're going to host the Mountain West Championship game next week, likely against UNLV, if UNLV takes care of business against Nevada. But, man, Boise hasn't looked the part. A few close calls in recent weeks, including last week at Wyoming. Again, I have Tulane favored over Boise right now in my power ratings. Oregon State, meanwhile, off their best performance this season, they can get to a bowl game with a win, so I do expect a pretty good effort out of them. Sharp group bet, Oregon State on Tuesday. Am I seeing a lot of... I mean, that's the only way I could go on the game would be Oregon State, but I don't have a tremendous... My numbers aren't showing a tremendous amount of value here. Texas State, South Alabama is next up. Again, rapid fire. I'm going to try to do 65 games in under an hour here. I know you guys got busy plans for Thanksgiving. And by the way, happy Thanksgiving to you and your families. I'll mention again at the end. Texas State, South Alabama. Quite simple. South Alabama needs a win and a Louisiana Lafayette loss to get to the Sun Belt Championship game. Texas State head coach G.J. Kinney, he's done a good job overall at this Texas State program. Just got a big raise and extension, but I got to be honest, I think he's done a poor job this season. Texas State's been favored in all 11 games. Texas State's 6-5 on the season, despite being favored in every game. Last week, they were a 23-point favorite against Georgia State. Lost the game. I mean, statistically, this should be a 9-win team. Top 20 in yards per play, yards per game, and scoring margins. As far as value, I don't really see it. My numbers are right on as far as both side and total. I made it 161, and here we are, Texas State at 1 point. Road favorite, total 61, so it's a pass. Next up, the Egg Bowl. Miss it not being played on Thanksgiving. I'm not sure if the fan bases miss it being on Thanksgiving. It'd be interesting. Now it's on a Friday afternoon. Ole Miss, one of the best teams in the country. Number 1 in yards per play margin, number 2 in yards per game margin, and yet won't make the playoffs. They've lost 3 games outright as a favorite. Last week's game against Florida, we previewed it right here, Todd and Payne and myself, and I was probably pretty aggressive in breaking it down where I thought, hey, Ole Miss is the right side. Market did agree, went from like 9.5, 10 to 13 later in the week. Boy, if you covered up the final score and just looked at the box score, you would have thought, Ole Miss won by double digits. Nope, they didn't. Stopped on downs at the 10-yard line a couple times, missed field goal, fumble, punt, you name it. A bunch of interceptions by Jackson Dart. Played pitiful for a team that was supposed to get healthy, off a bye, playoffs on the line. Bad effort. Mississippi State's got 9 losses this season, but only 1. They've been competitive. They've only lost 1 of the 9 by more than 24. Power ratings like Ole Miss here, but my head's telling me Mississippi State's the side. I don't know what. Speaking of where their heads are at, where is Ole Miss's frame of mind here? And laying points, a big number in a rivalry game. I just don't see it. So Mississippi State for me. Liberty, Sam Houston State's next up on a Friday. If Liberty wins the game, they travel to Jacksonville State for the Sun Belt Championship game next week. Sam Houston State needs a win and a Western Kentucky loss. Liberty, the better team in the stats. Last week they were super impressive, 419 rushing yards against Western Kentucky. But they have overall played the weakest schedule in the FBS. If you're telling me I could get 3 or more, I'm going to lean with the home dog here, Sam Houston State. Stanford, San Jose State's next. Looking at the matchup here, Stanford, after the bye, has played their best ball this season. They upset Louisville as a 3-touchdown home underdog last week. They should have upset Cal as a 2-touchdown underdog. They led 21-7 in the second half, blew the game late. Last Friday, in case you missed it, San Jose State was crushed by UNLV, much more worse than the final. For the season, San Jose State's better in the stats, but obviously Stanford's played the much tougher schedule. Early week money was on. There's a battle in the marketplace here now. A lot of the early week money was on San Jose State. Sharp group on Tuesday took the 3 with Stanford, went to 2.5. Immediate buyback on San Jose State at -2.5. So a little bit of a battle here. Where am I at? I want to go with Stanford, but I'm wait and see mode. I'm greedy. I want the hook possible on the Cardinal here. Next up, Nebraska, Iowa. Nebraska, kudos for them, clinching bowl eligibility. First time in 8 years last week, and they celebrated it too in style for getting that bowl eligibility, something they haven't had in a long time. Taller task this week. A night game at Kinnick, not an easy place to win, to say the least. Iowa's the better team in the yards per play margin by a significant margin. Similar strength of schedules. Do I see value in the side with Iowa currently favored by 5.5? No. I do lean over. I mean, these Iowa games this year seem a couple points, low, to say the least. I mean, it's probably the past 2 years when they went like 22-4 to the under, but these games are getting projected too low for Iowa this year. Their defense isn't as good. Their offense is obviously a little bit better than last year. The over is 9-2 in their games by an average of more than a touchdown per game. So lean over there as far as Nebraska, Iowa. Georgia Tech, Georgia, another rivalry game here. Next up, Georgia favored by 19.5, and notable Georgia 0-6 against the spread this year, laying 2 touchdowns or more. SEC championship game now on deck for Georgia. Everything played out and then some for them last week with all the upset losses for them to already clinch the SEC championship game. I kind of, SEC fans probably won't like it, but I want to see the best teams play. And Georgia, I have number 2 in my power rating, so I'm glad they're sitting there in the SEC championship game. Georgia Tech, a little bit extra time, played last Thursday, thrilling win over NC State. I love their coaching staff. Georgia Tech, the better running team. It's that running dog that the sharp guys like to bet, and I think that's the case here. So if you got to play it, I'll take the dog plus 19.5 Georgia Tech. Next up, Central Florida, Utah. Boy, I don't have much here. I mean, it could be the final game for Utah head coach Kyle Whittingham. He's going to announce his plans at the end of the season. I think he should step down. They've lost 7 straight since opening 4-0. I don't know what, boy, on paper, Central Florida is number 17 in the country in yards per play margin. Somehow they're 4-7. That's Gus Malzahn for you. But Tari is going to start at quarterback for Utah. He's the 4th different starting quarterback. What a mess. Just not interested in Insider total pass. Utah State, Colorado State next. I like what I'm seeing from Utah State's offense. 300-plus rushing yards the last couple weeks, 40-plus points the last couple weeks. Boy, they look dead in the water early against San Diego State. They're down 13-0. They reel off 41 straight. Colorado State still has a shot in the Mountain West, but they need a win. They need UNLV to get upset to get to the Mountain West championship game. Actually, I lean Utah State here plus a 6. I think we got a live dog. Final game on Black Friday, Navy, East Carolina. Keep an eye on the status of Navy's quarterback, Horvath. Banged up in the last game for Navy. The really big-time blowout loss to Tulane 35-0. That was prior to the bye. We'll see if he can go. You got Army coming up in a couple weeks. Maybe they'll try to protect him here. Not much to play for. East Carolina's won 4 straight with their interim coach, and now Blake Harrell is going to be their permanent coach moving forward. They decided to promote him. I'm not sure that's the greatest move. I think East Carolina's a good job. I visited their stadium. I think it's one of the better Group of 5 stadiums in the country, fertile recruiting area. I would have put some feelers out there to see if I could have got someone better than the interim, but it is what it is. Offense is averaging 46 points per game since Harrell took over as the interim. Lean over. If Horvath plays, I think this is a dead over game at 56. Let's get to Saturday. Speaking of the service academies, we got Army taking on UTSA. Army favored by 7. I thought this was an interesting stat, and it was brought to my attention by Tim Murray, who I do a show with on VSiN. Big Notre Dame fan Tim is, so he keeps track of some of the stuff even better than I do. After facing Notre Dame this year, teams are 0-9-1 against the spread. Haven't covered a game the week after playing Notre Dame. They failed to cover by a significant margin. How about 12.3 points per game? I'm not a big trends guy, but it makes sense in this instance for a couple reasons. Number one, obviously teams put a little bit more into the Notre Dame game than most of the other games on their schedule. Also, if you pay attention to Notre Dame's team this year, they're extremely physical. If you watched the Army-Notre Dame game last week, took its toll on Army. Multiple starters went down, injuries in that game, couldn't finish it. I mean, Daly ran it 39 times at quarterback. I question him being out there. It's 49-7. Daly ran it 11 times. 11 on the final drive alone, down 42 points. Is he going to be 100% for this game? I'm not sure. The opponent, UTSA, is playing their best ball this season. 3 straight wins, 3 straight covers. Army's got the American Championship game against Tulane on deck. They're off Notre Dame, and they have Navy also in a couple weeks. I like UTSA. I think we got another live dog as a 7-point dog, so that tells you how much I like it. TCU Cincinnati's next. TCU's laying now 3.5 on the road. A little bit of money on TCU showed in the market on Tuesday. Cincinnati's lost 4 straight, both straight up and against the spread. Their coach, Scott Satterfield, I'm not a fan. should be on the hot seat already in year 2. I mean, especially if they lose and fail to make a bowl. I think TCU quietly has won 4 of their last 5 games, probably not getting enough mention nationally. Horned Frogs far superior in yards per play margin, more than a yard per play on average better. Since he is that home underdog and the better running team, boy, now that it's at 3.5, though, I got to lean Cincinnati. Well, we'll see, sitting on 5 wins. They need this one like blood. Coastal Carolina, Georgia State's next. Georgia State, now a 1-point favorite. Georgia State, I mentioned it. Big time outright upset last week. 23-point underdogs against Texas State. They win. Coastal sitting on 5 wins. Need it for a bowl game. I want to bring this up. This is something you could take moving forward, not just this year, but to any year. What do I see this week in particular that's different than any other week? I think you're paying premiums on mediocre teams. Any team that's sitting at 5 wins, you'll get the talking heads. Oh, they need a win to get to bowl. Need a win to get to bowl. You got to bet that team. It's either them or pass. And I think by the end of the week, after getting that narrative driven home day after day, maybe you're laying an extra half point or a point on a mediocre team to begin with. So I find myself a lot of times close to post, close to kickoff, fading the team that needs to win to get to bowl eligibility. Always a case-by-case basis, though, never betting it blindly. As far as the game, I don't see much value. That's why I went on a tangent there. Where I do like this game coming up, and if you just watch the college football playoff rankings, this game means a hell of a lot more. South Carolina, Clemson. Clemson, believe it or not, folks, needs a win here. It would be their best win of the season over South Carolina. Doesn't need too much help, I think, to maybe sneak their way into an at-large berth here. Clemson favored by 2.5. Problem is, they're up against it, in my opinion, in this game. I think South Carolina is the right side. Gamecocks have played a much tougher schedule. They're better in yards per play margin. Gamecocks in better form. They won 5 straight. Huge matchup edge here if you're into that. I mean, we know this. South Carolina's got a top 5 defensive line in the country, maybe even top 2 or 3. And Clemson right now, banged up on the offensive line. They've had multiple starters out several games. We'll see if they can somehow get healthy this week. That's going to be a problem in this game. Market is all over this, though. I mean, this game opened as high as 5 on Sunday. Again, blew right through a key number of 3, down to 2.5, so there's not as much value as there was. Do lean over here. I think South Carolina's offense is trending certainly in the right direction. Pittsburgh-Boston College next. We'll see if we can go this whole show without taking a sip of water. It's going to be a test. Speaking of tests, Pittsburgh at BC is a test for Pittsburgh. I mean, especially in their current form after their 7-0 start. They've lost 4 straight, blown out by Louisville last week. Eli Holstein's out for this one. BC's bowl eligible. I think Bill O'Brien's done a really good job with this team. They've covered 4 in a row. Offense is taken off with quarterback change. Man, the market was wrong on that one. They really downgraded BC, losing Castellanos. Reality was they've upgraded as far as what they want to do offensively with James at quarterback. They blew out North Carolina, put up 40-plus last week. Is there value? Boy, the market loves BC here. So I'm going to say, if you want to bet Pitt, wait. And that's going to be my preference. Let's see if we can get a 6 or so on Pitt. I think it's a little too much to lay for BC. Another rivalry game up next, NC State, North Carolina. This got a little bit more meaning today as Mac Brown was fired on Tuesday. Kind of a stunner. He is going to be allowed to coach in this game, so this is probably it for him. I think it was deserved, though. I mean, the Tar Heels have only covered 2 games this year. His age, if you follow recruiting, they were negatively recruiting against North Carolina the last couple of recruiting cycles. NC State still sitting on 5 wins. They need this one like blood. Heartbreaking loss. They haven't given up on the season. They should have probably beaten Georgia Tech. They have won 3 straight in this rivalry. I lean over at current. North Carolina is favored by 3.5. Looks like some money wants to come in on NC State. So I could tell you just reading the tea leaves, if you want to bet NC State, probably do so now. Take the hook. That's about where my numbers have it. I haven't decided to bet it. This is one I would have loved to break down with Payne. Again, he said, you know what? Well, we trust you with the college. We got the NFL to work on with the short week with all the Thanksgiving plans. But Florida State's next. You want to talk about a line move? In the summer, I had to look this up. Florida State was favored by 11.5. Not Florida. Florida State was favored by 11.5 in the summer. Now they're a 15-point underdog. I had to go back through my ratings. I've downgraded Florida State more than any team in any season in my power ratings since 2018. It was a Louisville team that went from Lamar Jackson to 2-10 the next year. So that's the last time I downgraded a team 3 touchdowns in one season. Florida State, first team in 6 years. Florida, look, I was probably a little too negative. I wasn't negative on the job that Billy Napier's done. I just didn't like the matchup last week, and somehow, some way, they found a way to win the game outright. So kudos. Billy Napier's deservedly got another year, and this team has responded accordingly. They've outright upset LSU and Ole Miss. I got them number 20 now in the power ratings, Florida at 6-5. But with all that being spread, downgraded Florida State more than any team in 6 years. Got Florida number 20 in my power rankings. I can't get to 15 on the road. Man, yeah, this is the clothespin. You put it on your nose, and you don't make a big bet. But right now, I lean Florida State plus 15. Northern Illinois, Central Michigan's next. Final game, and you're gonna hear me say this a lot. Final game for a coach. This one being Central Michigan head coach Jim McElwain. He's retiring, and this is it for him. A little off the field stuff that I think will come to light when it's all said and done. NIU 6-5 on the season. Somehow they're 6-5, yet they've outgained their opponents by an average of 100 yards per game. I mean, this team statistically should probably be an 8-win team. I don't have much here. I do think, it might be a shock to some. Kickoff temperature, 20s, 20 degrees outside of, just west of Chicago. I've been in that stadium. Looks like it's a wind tunnel. My numbers lean over, but my goodness, it's supposed to be windy and cold. I can understand why this total's come down here to 44. North Texas Temple next. North Texas sitting at 5-1 this season. Their only loss was to Texas Tech. They were having a good year. They've lost 5 straight games. However, all of them to bowl teams. They're taking a major step down in class here against a Temple team just playing out the season with the interim coach. But that's why North Texas laying 11 here. Boy, it was a game that I was thinking, hey, there might be some value. Let's bet North Texas. Didn't see it. Wanted less than 10. Probably was a little too greedy. 10 came up. Didn't hit bet quick enough there. Tennessee Vanderbilt, another intriguing game. Pretty much watching the college football playoff seeding show. A win by Tennessee here, they're in the playoffs. They're in. Probably a road game, but still in. That's better than what they were feeling a couple weeks ago when it looked like they were on the outside looking in. That's easier said than done, though, a win here, because we are talking Vanderbilt, 7-1 against the spread as an underdog this year. Tough laying double digits with the Tennessee offense that's averaging 23 points per game in SEC play. That's a big stark comparison to averaging 62 points per game in non-conference action. We just saw them run it up on, and they covered a big spread against UTEP. But against SEC teams, I haven't seen that from this offense. So for me, it's dog or pass. Vanderbilt would be the preferred side there for me. Connecticut, Massachusetts next. I thought UMass with an interim coach gave a great effort last week against Georgia. If you weren't paying attention, 31-21 in the middle of the third quarter in Athens, Georgia. That was impressive. Another head scratcher for Georgia, not being in the game. We'll see. Connecticut, misleading 7-point loss to Syracuse. Should have been more. Orange outgained them by nearly 200 yards. But it's been a great season for UConn. They have a chance for their first 8-win season since 2010. Easy enough for me to say. Value over for me, it's 49.5. I don't want to lay 10.5 on the road. If Massachusetts looked like a dead cat last week, I thought I was going to be betting Connecticut, but I didn't see that. Miami, Florida at Syracuse. I think this should be one of the more entertaining games of the weekend. It should be offense galore. Obviously, Miami, number 1 offense in the country, yards per play, yards per game scoring. Syracuse's offense, extremely pass happy with McCord, averaging 454 total yards per game. Miami, if you're just looking at final scores, you think, another great one for Miami last week. Well, it was misleading. They outscored Wake 22-0 in the final 8 minutes. Kudos for them. They keep the foot on the gas pedal, but for long stretches in these games, they do not look like a top 10 team. Especially away from home, they haven't been dominant. Especially since this, start of the season. since, beating Florida up in South Florida away from home, probably should have lost to Cal. Louisville game was, back and forth. Lost to Georgia Tech. Anything above 10, I think Syracuse is the right side here, especially with that offense continuing to throw on this, what I think is an average Miami defense. Another rivalry game next, Virginia Tech. As I try to catch my breath again, I'm going to try to get this all in under an hour. Rapid fire. Both teams sitting at 5-6. Virginia Tech. Both need a win, obviously, for bowl eligibility. Both reeling. Virginia's lost 5 of 6. Virginia Tech's lost 3 straight. Both coaches, I think, should be feeling a little bit of heat. Virginia Tech's obviously better in the stats, but they've been banged up at quarterback. Kyron Jones hasn't been playing. The backup got banged up last week. I can't lay 7.5 right now with what I know. So if you had to play it, some of you want action on a lot of these games, with it being the final week of the regular season. You can't bet your favorite team for another 9 months. I lean over 48.5. Check the weather, though. Another rivalry game, Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan, battle of the MAC. Both teams, this is going to be very similar to what I just said. Both teams sitting at 5-6. Both teams reeling. Eastern's lost 4 straight. Western's lost 3 straight. Western Michigan, full yard per play better margin. Played the tougher schedule. Eastern Michigan's been really good as a dog under Chris Creighton. 28-8 against the spread the last 10 years as a road dog. I didn't bet side or total, though. Pass. JMU, James Madison hosting Marshall. Marshall, I don't think this has gotten enough play. Did you know the team with the best ATS record in college football, Marshall, this season? Marshall, that's right, 9-1-1. Average cover, not dominant, 6.5 points per game. They win here. Marshall's going to clinch a berth in the Sun Belt Championship game. That's a pretty good job there by Charles Huff. I wasn't expecting much this year. In fact, I thought they might not even have a winning record. It's going to be a tall task, though. James Madison, much better in the stats. Off kind of a misleading loss last week. I bet James Madison. My numbers still like it, even at 3.5. So it becomes a really big bet at -3. I can tell you that. Charlotte playing UAB. Just when you thought it was all over for Trent Dilfer, I mean, UAB's played better as of late. Highlighted last week, they're 7-point home underdog to Rice. They win 40-14. Overall on the season, they're better in the stats than Charlotte. Charlotte's playing with an interim coach, but they've had a pretty good performance last week. Tim Brewster led them to a win. Sharp Group took UAB +3 on Tuesday. I'm not a part of it. It's kind of a stay away game. It's tough for me as I get older to handicap the motivation of these players in what I perceive to be meaningless games in week 14, the last game of the season. I don't see much value here. And speaking of that, even though I like this game and this rivalry, App State, Georgia Southern, it's a rivalry that goes back to their SoCon days and back in Division I AA when it was called back then. App State sitting at 5-5, needing a win to get to a bowl. Georgia Southern needs a win and a Marshall loss to get the Sun Belt Championship game. Haven't gotten to the under yet. I want to get a weather report. And I know they played back-to-back high-scoring games in this series the last 2 years, but showing a little bit of value on under 62.5 right now. I got to get a weather report, though. Duke Wake Forest is next. I don't think Manny Diaz has gotten enough love this season, the new Duke head coach. The market, including me, hammered their win total under to the point I think it got as low as 5. They win this game, folks. Duke 9-3. So, I mean, Manny's done a really good job. Wake sitting at home for the holidays again. No bet side or total here. But, again, kudos Manny Diaz. All right, this is the game you've probably been waiting on. Took me, a half hour to get to it. Ohio State, Michigan. You might have heard of it. The game. You might have also known that Michigan's won 3 straight in the rivalry. They've dominated the line of scrimmage in each of those games. It's safe to say I don't expect that to continue here. I know in the last, week and a half, the vibes are really good right now in Ann Arbor. They just got the number 1 recruit in the country coming in at quarterback for next season. They're getting other recruits to commit. They're off their best performance of the season. They absolutely hammered Northwestern last week. So they're feeling probably as good about themselves as they had since September. However, I got to tell you, Ohio State's now number 1 in my power ratings. They've been number 1 the last couple of weeks, but now there's a little bit of margin between them and Georgia. I thought their defensive line whipped Indiana last week. That's what it looks like, folks. That's what national championship caliber teams look like, how badly they whipped Indiana up front on their defensive line. Obviously, we got Ohio State laying 20.5 here. Anytime you got a big favorite, you got to ask yourself this. Is there motivation for margin? Obviously, Ohio State has that. We just saw them punch in a touchdown in the final seconds versus Indiana when they could have taken a knee. Losing 3 straight to Michigan. If they are given the opportunity to score late, they will. I do find it interesting as far as the total. We're sitting at 43.5 on Tuesday. The over is 10-0 in this series, a 10-0 run in this series. I mean, I just think there's probably a misperception. You think defense, run the football, bad weather. Not been the case here in the last decade. 10-0 to the over by quite some margin, too. Speaking of bad weather, kickoff temperature, 26 degrees right now. So it's going to be brutally cold there. But my numbers do lean over, 43.5. I know some of you historians out there wondering, 20.5 point spread. It's right now at 20.5. It's tied for the second largest point spread in the series. My records go back to 1976, and totals were much lower as we get back before then. So, you'd probably have to go back to maybe the 60s if they were doing point spreads to when Michigan was down in the 50s and 60s to find a big point spread like this outside of I think it was 2014 when Ohio State was laying 3 touchdowns. But big game. I'll be watching it. I don't think just because it's one of the bigger games of the week doesn't mean it's necessarily one of the biggest bets of the week. Again, I'm going to check the weather a little bit closer. If we're not getting too much wind, I'm going to lean over. I think I wouldn't, or at least maybe Ohio State team total over. Since I lean Ohio State, lean over. Let's combine the two. Ohio State team total over. Next up, ODU, Arkansas State. Obviously, we're right here on the podcast. I had a non-powers 5 best bet against Arkansas State. Lost the game. I got to tell you, I think they're continued to be a fraud. Outgained, somehow won against UL Monroe. I'll get into it when we talk UL Monroe, what happened. But Arkansas State, 7-4 on the season, yet they're minus 1.4 yards per play. That's their margin. That's number 124 in the country. So they continue, in my opinion, to be a fraud. Just to put in perspective, Old Dominion, their opponent here, is 4-7, and they're flat in yards per play margin on the season. So 0.0 for their same as Blutarski's grade point average. That's why Old Dominion's laying 4 on the road here. I'm part of the Old Dominion money. I think there's slight value there. Illinois Northwestern is going to be played at Wrigley Field. Northwestern, I just mentioned a few minutes ago, off their worst performance this season. I mean, 50-6 lost to Michigan. Illinois, meanwhile, couldn't be more opposite. I mean, they're living a charmed life this year. Last week hit a Hail Mary, basically touchdown pass after Rutgers tried to ice their kicker on a missed field goal. He misses it, but they called timeout, so they replay it, and they decide to, instead of kicking it, they throw a Hail Mary and get a touchdown. Beat Rutgers. What happens this week? I think the 7.5 is pretty tempting with a low total with the dog off of bad. I think it's a good buy low spot. Buy low, sell high. Northwestern plus 7.5 for me. Rutgers, Michigan State's next. Michigan State now favored by 2, taking some money. They're 5-6, need a win to get to a bowl. Rutgers already sitting in bowl eligibility, coming off that heartbreaking loss to Illinois. Michigan State's much better in the stats as far as yards per play margin. They played the tougher schedule. Understand why Michigan State's taking the money here. That's certainly a lean there at -2. FIU, Middle Tennessee, I don't have much here. A little bit of money on FIU. I'm a part of that. I mean, Middle Tennessee's a miserable 3-8 straight up and against the spread this year. 15-point home loss as a favorite last week to New Mexico State. Made a bad hire in Derek Mason. We'll see if he can turn around in year 2, but I have my doubts. FIU this season's actually plus 0.4 yards per play margin. They usually screams a winning record, not a losing one. I don't have much on the current price of -9, but I did bet FIU early in the week. Arizona State, Arizona, interesting game. Arizona State wins. They're in the Big 12 championship game. Remarkable. Win total is 4.5. 125-1 to win the conference, the Big 12 in the summer. 125-1 Arizona State was. So if they win here, and they're expected to do so, they're now a 9-point favorite. Speaking of that line, 9-point favorite, Arizona State. What was this one in the summer? I looked it up. Arizona State was a 17-point underdog. How about a 26-point move? We've seen more of them this year than ever before. I mean, every week we have 2 or 3 of those. That just has never been the case, ever. Or at least in the last 10 years I've been following it. Arizona's season obviously has been a nightmare. They're a nation worst, 2-9 against the spread. Obviously they can salvage it here with an upset. I'm not calling the upset, but I got to say this. If you watched Arizona State last week, they got out to the big lead against BYU. Played tight in that second half. Are they going to be tight here knowing what's at stake? A win and you're going to the Big 12 championship game. You're against your rival. You're on the road. I lean Arizona. Gonna wait. I mean, it's a lean at 9. It's a big bet at 10. Houston, BYU's next. BYU's out to a 13-point favorite. Obviously, BYU was 9-0 a couple weeks ago. They suffered back-to-back close losses. For them, if all 4 6-2 Big 12 teams right now win this week, it looks like it's going to be Arizona State versus Iowa State, so BYU's going to need some help here. Houston's dead not under team, to say the least. Their offense struggled all year. It's dead last in scoring, but their defense only giving up 22 points per game this season, so it's tough to want to lay doubles against this team when they don't give up much. So lean Houston at 13. Bigger bet if it goes to 14. Air Force San Diego State's next. Air Force has been a hot team lately. 3 straight wins, 4 straight covers. I think there's rumors out there that they're first in line if there's not enough 6-6 teams for bowl eligibility. Air Force, if they win this game, get to 5-7, they'll be at the top of the list with their high APR scores. They started this season, Air Force, 0-7. But with that being said, tough laying more than a field goal on the road. I mean, yeah, Air Force -2.5, -3. Okay, that's worth the bet. At 3.5, no. Even though San Diego State's looked like a piece of crap the last few weeks, they've lost 5 straight. UCLA Fresno State's next. We still got 20-some games, folks. I mean, again, the biggest FBS versus FBS board we've ever seen in the history of college football. UCLA, I mean, this is the biggest power ratings disparity of the week for me. I mean, I got UCLA 13. That should not happen this time of year, to have a 4.5-point spread disparity. Why? Is it an injury? Maybe, that I don't know about, although I did watch the UCLA-USC game. I didn't see anybody get injured, but I think some of it has to just, some of the models don't handle strength of schedule disparities, especially huge ones this time of year. To put in perspective, I don't think it handled the Ohio State-Indiana game that well, and particularly it did not handle the disparity in Army and Notre Dame last week, where I had a big overlay saying bet Notre Dame big. And yeah, Army has great stats, but they haven't played anybody yet. UCLA's played the second toughest schedule in the country. Fresno, number 99. I know UCLA. We'll see how motivated they are coming off the tough loss to an arch rival, USC. I just got to tell you, at 8 now in some spots, that's UCLA go for me. South Florida at Rice is next. South Florida out to a 5-point road favorite here. They've been playing better as of late. He went out their quarterback. Boy, Pete Thamel had that kid playing. He's not going to play the rest of the season. Remember, right before the game, their quarterback, Brown, he might play this week. Nope, he hasn't played since, and that was 6 weeks ago. Rice, last week, misleading loss. They got blown out. 40-14 is a 7-point favorite. Was misleading, but you got to think with an interim, I mean, how motivated are they? They just hired their next head coach. He's from Davidson, so I don't know. There's too many moving parts there to get involved. Power rings do lean Rice there. West Virginia, Texas Tech. Speaking to Jekyll and Hyde teams, you box of chocolates, you don't know what you're getting from either one. West Virginia, a 3.5-point road underdog. They're off a big win against UCF. Probably need another win here. I'm not saying Neil Brown's job is in jeopardy, but for him to be safe, and that he needs to pull another upset here. I haven't bet it yet. Numbers lean West Virginia, but again, they're off a good performance. That usually means they got a bad performance coming their way. Jacksonville State, Western Kentucky. Next, Western Kentucky favored by 1.5. Jacksonville State doesn't have much to play for here. I think that's why they're a road underdog. Obviously, they've already clinched the Conference USA Championship game. We'll be playing it at home. Western Kentucky, I don't know what's happened with their defense the last 3 weeks. They've given up 419 yards last week, and they've given up over 200 yards, I think, 2 weeks ago, and then 300 yards the week before that. So And that's not a good look against a very powerful Jacksonville State rushing offense. So, boy, matchup-wise, even though they don't have much to play for, I lean Jacksonville State plus the 1.5, plus 2. Southern Miss Troy, game I'm not really interested in. I do think it's very tough to lay 17.5 with a bad team in Troy. The market thought Southern Miss, and I kind of thought so too, had given up on the season. They were outscored 95-6 in their previous 2 games, and they covered last week somehow. So again, very tough to handicap and quantify motivation when you're not 20 years old, you're not in that locker room. Boy, it's 17.5. I can't get there with Troy, so that would be dog or pass. Oklahoma LSU, this game got more interesting after last week. Oklahoma pulls an absolute stunner. They covered by 5 touchdowns in their outright upset win over Alabama. Really featuring the run game. Slow tempo, Jackson Arnold in the quarterback run game. And guess what? LSU struggles to defend quarterback run game. LSU took a lot of money last week against Vanderbilt, but did not get to the window. Vanderbilt covered in a 7-point loss. Big game for Brian Kelly, to say the least. Venables certainly quieted his critics with that big win last week. I'm meandering because I think exactly my power rating on the game is 5.9, and we got LSU favored by 6. Pass. Florida Atlantic Tulsa, I got no interest. 2 interim coaches. No interest. FAU's favored by 1.5. I got nothing. Kansas Baylor. Kansas is the best team in the Big 12. I know they're 5-6. Have you watched them play the last month? I mean, what are they? It's a shame that they're not, they lost a couple close games early, because this is the best team in the Big 12. And Baylor's playing well, is right there with them. I mean, you can make a case. You want to tell me Baylor's the second or third best team, at least the last month or so, I wouldn't doubt you there. So, good matchup. Kansas is taking the money. I'm part of the Kansas train here. They got to win to get the bowl eligibility. Baylor's already clinched it. I do wonder, Kansas has, had these big-time performances back-to-back. How much they got left in the tank, even though this game means more to them than Baylor. So at current, I would lean Kansas, but certainly preferred them when there was a plus sign next to their name. Cal SMU's next. Anxious to see the motivation for SMU. Obviously, they help their chances if they win as far as an at-large, but obviously the ACC championship game means a hell of a lot more next week. Cal's off a big rivalry win last week against Stanford, come from behind. They stormed the field. Big celebration. Now they're traveling across the country. They've clinched bowl eligibility. I don't like the motivation factor for either team, so pass. Texas A&M, huge game. Winner. That's right, the winner goes to the SEC championship game. Even Texas A&M, after the loss against Auburn last week, can still get there with a win. A little bit of money on A&M this week. 5.5 right now. Quinn Ewers is the storyline there, a little bit banged up. I anticipate he'll go. Texas A&M spot-wise after the loss. Boy, Kyle Field at night. Obviously, they haven't played this rivalry in almost 15 years. It should be one of the best atmospheres in all of college football this entire season. It's in no man's land. I know Payne and Todd would be asking me, where do you see the line going? I think a lot of it depends on Ewers. I mean, I'm going to cop out and say, this is where I'm at on the game. There was a really dumb number early in the week, Texas 3. I laid it, but I would be much more interested in taking 7 with A&M later in the week. We'll see if it gets there. I think A&M's the right side, but I don't have the right price right now at 5.5. I need a little bit higher. Louisville, Kentucky, another game, another rivalry. Kentucky's dominated this series, but yet we find Louisville favored by 3.5, 4. Looks like Kentucky's going to go to the young quarterback as a starter. They played pretty well last week. They covered against Texas. Some sharp groups were betting Kentucky on game day there. I can't lay more than 3 with Louisville. I mean, I don't know what Louisville I'm getting. I think at times Louisville looks like a clear top 20 team in the country, maybe even top 15. And then other times, they're losing to Stanford. So I anticipate they'll play better here, but I can't lay. Sometimes keep it simple. You got an ACC team favored by more than a field goal on the road against an SEC team. Kentucky. One that I like a little bit more, Arkansas against Missouri. I am part of this move on Arkansas this week. It's went from 4.5 down to 3. Arkansas, stats-wise, the much better team. yards per play margin, more than 1 yard per play better, and Arkansas's played the tougher schedule. I know Missouri's gotten a big bump with the quarterback coming back, Brady Cook, in the last couple weeks, but to me, Arkansas is the better running team. They're the underdog. I like Arkansas. Would not be a bit surprised they win the game outright. Iron Bowl is next. Boy, what are we getting here now after last week? So is it a sell high, buy low? I don't know. Auburn off the big win, biggest win of the season for them. They beat A&M. Still can get the bowl eligibility with a win here. Alabama off their worst performance this season. They failed to cover by 5 touchdowns against Oklahoma. What's the fan base going to be like? The atmosphere? Alabama's still outside shot, believe it or not, with 3 losses. It is, last I checked, ESPN's still broadcasting the playoffs, and it's still Alabama, so I wouldn't count them out yet as far as the playoffs. Power ratings, love Alabama here. Think it should be closer to 2 touchdowns. I bet Alabama, but not with extreme high confidence here. Kansas State, Iowa State, we got about 10 games left and about 10 minutes left. So I think I'm going to accomplish the goal here. Kansas State, Iowa State, Farmageddon is what they call it. I think they're opening up. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm doing this off the top of my head. I think they open up next season in Ireland, Farmageddon. Obviously, you go back to last year and there was a Snowmageddon in this game. I think Kansas State's the right side, and we did see a sharp, respectable group take them +3. They're the better running team, the better team in yards per play. It's kind of a sneaky spot with all the pressure on Iowa State as far as getting to the Big 12 championship game. Numbers matter. I can't recommend taking 2.5 now when 3 what was available about 6 hours ago. Another rivalry, Lafayette against UM Monroe, Louisiana Lafayette against Louisiana Monroe here. Man, Monroe's taking some money. They must, I just know how it goes, folks. We gave out Monroe last week. Probably should have won. Let me pull that one up as far as what happened. Now, and I want to make sure I get this right. So I had it on the stream. UM Monroe was stopped on the Arkansas State 26. They fumbled on the Arkansas State 4. Arkansas State got a 3rd and 12 touchdown. They got another 3rd and 12 touchdown. So that among, I didn't even list, there was 7 things there. So that sucked last week. So what happens this week? I think UM Monroe's the right side, and I think the market's telling you that. This opened as high as 13. Now it's down to 9.5. Louisiana's playing with a backup quarterback. They got the Sun Belt Championship game most likely on deck if they win this game. I think UL Monroe is pretty live here as a big dog. Washington, Oregon, speaking of dogs, I don't think Washington's too live. Both teams off a bye. You got Oregon favored by 19. Oregon's got most likely the Buckeyes on deck. So what's their motivation for margin? You would think with big games on deck, there's not as much. But keep in mind, Washington has beaten Dan Lanning and Oregon 3 straight times. So this is one where I'm hearing a lot of people tell me they like Washington. I don't. I think Oregon's the right side here. So, again, when you got a big favorite, you got motivation for margin, I think Oregon has it. Purdue, Indiana, I think it's another favorite with motivation for margin after last week. Indiana, if given the opportunity, I think I want to put one on Purdue. Purdue, good effort last week in the second half. You thought they were going to get blown out against Michigan State. They rallied, only lost by 7, but they're really up against it here. The old Oaken Buckets going to Indiana. Can I lay 29, though? No. I could have looked at, shame on me for not looking it up. Last time Indiana was favored by 29 this series, I'm guessing never. Or at least we got to go back to Bill Mallory days. Maryland, Penn State's next. Penn State favored now by 24.5. Another team that James Franklin knows the point spread. He's not afraid to score late. Maryland, I think, is a dead cat after what happened last week. No bowl eligibility for them. But 24.5 is a little too expensive for me, so it's a pass. UTEP, New Mexico State's next. I-10 rivalry. Nice area of the country. I drove through it a couple years ago. Visited both stadiums. I like it. I got a couple of first-year coaches trying to finish off this season right. I can't get the 3. I see the markets on New Mexico State here. I can't get the 3, so I lean with the dog. I haven't bet it yet, though. Speaking of trying to handicap motivation, so if you remember, and I'm sure you do because it lost, gave out Kennesaw State a couple weeks ago, non-powers 5, lost. I've been having a terrible year, and I apologize. Had 2 good years this year for some reason. I cannot pick worth a damn, to say the least, although the win totals look like they're doing okay if you paid attention to those in the offseason. Kennesaw State, though. Obviously, they fire their coach. It's not popular. Half the team enters the portal. most of the starters enter the portal. However, even though they entered the portal, they finished out the season. Not only finished out the season and played the games, they nearly outright upset Sam Houston State, even though that line moved a touchdown against them. And last week they did pull the outright upset. So they're playing their best ball of the season with an interim coach. So who knows what that locker room's like. Can you lay this kind of number with Louisiana Tech? I don't know. Their offense hasn't been that great, but Louisiana Tech defensively has been pretty good this year, and they've been pretty competitive in almost every game that they've played, including last week. Market was against them against Arkansas, and Louisiana Tech covered that game. I didn't get to the window. Again, Louisiana Tech favored by 12, total 42. 4 more. Wyoming, Washington State. Keep an eye. I don't think Wyoming's quarterback. They started the season with one quarterback, ineffective. Went to I think Anderson is his name. I'm blanking. I think it's Anderson. Quarterback. I don't think he's going to play, so they're going back to the one kid that I didn't like at all, even though they talked him up all off season. So that's a concern there. Washington State's off of a brutal loss against Oregon State. They're a double-digit favorite. They lose outright. That's coming off a loss as a double-digit favorite to New Mexico the week prior. So, man, back-to-back horrific performances for the Cougars. Let's see if they finish strong here. I bet the over, but I wasn't anticipating the Wyoming quarterback to be out. I don't like the original starter, to say the least. And it is Caden Anderson and Svoboda. Oh, my God, I can't say. I'm butchering it. That's the quarterback that'll probably play. Brutal last couple of 4 games here. I thought I was going to have a good podcast, and I just messed it all up. Hit restart. No, I'm joking. Notre Dame USC, big game. Notre Dame wins. They're in the playoff. They get a home playoff game. It'll probably, a lot of people are asking me, hey, who do you like as a long shot in the playoffs? Notre Dame on paper, yeah, but we got to see the bracket. I mean, a lot of people ask me that. Let's see the bracket. Because there's going to be 4 or 5, in my opinion, fraudulent teams in the bracket. It's just, can you line up and get a couple of games against those teams in the first couple rounds? USC. So this is from my buddy Josh Pate. This is a stat on USC. 6 FBS teams have led in every fourth quarter this season. Notre Dame is one of them. One of the other teams out of the 6 is USC. USC, despite having the lead in every game in the fourth quarter this season, USC has 5 losses. The other 5 teams have 5 losses combined. So USC much better than their record. Tough to get margin on this USC team. Although I do think Notre Dame is probably the best team they've faced, and Notre Dame right now, number 1 in the country in scoring margin. So, look, they have not played that tough of a schedule. USC is the best team they've faced since September. But once you have the schedule set, you can't control who you play. You can control how you play. And since the Northern Illinois game, I mean, Notre Dame's been as dominant as any team in college football, including last week against Army. Market liked Army, and obviously you knew you had a winner with Notre Dame in the second quarter at that point. Couple questions. If it is a close game, obviously that's been in USC's wheelhouse all season. Every one of their games pretty much has been close. Notre Dame has not. How do they react with all the pressure? Got to win to get to the playoffs. Haven't been in a close game since September. But I also got to ask, how will USC handle the physicality at the line of scrimmage? Because Notre Dame will probably be the most physical team they've played, at least up there with Penn State and Michigan. But I honestly think Notre Dame's more physical than those 2 teams this year. So how will USC respond? And I don't like Jordan Mailata at quarterback. If Miller Moss, I would be saying, best bet material USC if Miller Moss was a quarterback, just because he could take advantage of some things that Notre Dame does. And boy, Mailata to me is a turnover machine. Even though Miller Moss was having turnover issues, I think Mailata is more of a hindrance. We'll see. Even though they won a couple games, I do lean USC plus 7.5. Notre Dame, I look back at it. 1966, I went back to. Notre Dame's only beaten USC 5 times by more than 7 in the Coliseum. 5 times since 1966. Doesn't happen very often. Notre Dame getting margin in the Coliseum. Nevada and UNLV, the battle for the Fremont Cannon here. It's currently painted red. It'll stay painted red because UNLV will win the game, but will they cover? Boy, Nevada in these big underdog roles have been pretty feisty. I like Nevada last week. They blew that game against Air Force. UNLV, though, I mean, pretty impressive performance. San Jose State run the football right down Nevada. Nevada's a little bit banged up. I could lean Nevada here plus 17.5, plus 18, but I haven't gotten to the window yet. Final game on the board, New Mexico, old school, at Hawaii. So the last game will be the Hawaii game, fitting for the final game of the regular season. New Mexico favored by 2.5. Keep an eye on the Hawaii quarterback, Shager. Got banged up in the last game. I know they're coming off a bye, but in the last game they got absolutely annihilated by Utah State. He got dinged up, and there's word that they might be going with the young freshman quarterback, who I actually like. He's a redshirt freshman. New Mexico, though, I think the storyline is this. They win. They're going to a bowl game. Keep in mind, if you followed in the summer preview series, we gave out New Mexico's win total over 1.5, a win, and they're going to a bowl game. So incredible job. Probably not getting enough love nationally. Bronco Mendenhall, Dampier, the quarterback's maybe the best running quarterback in college football. The Sanders kid at running back from Iowa State's also a big play waiting to happen. I like New Mexico minus 2.5. So if you need a little bit of a bailout game, lay the 2.5. So you can rewind. You can kind of tell. I didn't, beat around the bush as far as some of the games that I liked. There's a lot that I like. I don't know if there's necessarily I've been banging this drum all year. I don't know if Tuesday and Wednesday is the best pricing days of the week this year. Every year the market seems to be different, but waiting on some key half-point moves around key numbers. But biggest card, biggest board of the year, maybe one of the bigger cards if the moves are right. And speaking of moves, I anticipate a move happening on the best bet that's coming up. But first and foremost, want to wish each and every one of you a very happy and safe Thanksgiving. Enjoy it with your families. Enjoy some football, food, friends, family. And we'll be back. All three of us will be back previewing all the conference championship games next week. But until then, I am going to throw it over to the man. That is Todd Fuhrman. He is going to give you this week's college football best bet. See you next week.
Thanks, BP, and absolutely incredible work from Brad. I mean, there is a reason he is an encyclopedia for college football knowledge. We go, BP, we want you to break down a couple of the marquee games. He goes, you know what? I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to run through the entire board. So that is a luxury that we're afforded around these parts, and hopefully gave you plenty of ammunition should you find yourself back and forth vacillating on a couple of bets, whether it's the game on Thursday that he started with between Memphis and Tulane, or the get-out game with a lot at stake for the New Mexico Lobos as short road favorites on the islands against Hawaii, with a chance to do something that we thought was relatively improbable coming into the year, getting bowl eligible for those folks down in Albuquerque. And before we get to the college football best bet, I want to remind all of you guys and girls to be following Brad on social media. That's at BradPower7. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You, of course, can follow me there. You can follow Payne if you're so inclined at Payne Insider. But most importantly, for all things Bet the Board podcast related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And also, it's not too late to sign up for the Bet the Board podcast newsletter. Bucky Irving comfortably over his rushing total last week. It looked like we were going to be hanging in the balance, but he busted off the explosive against the Giants. And that was a number that we saw take major money once the newsletter went live. 50.5, the available price tag at a national book. Number got as high as 57.5. So you guys, pretty aggressive appetites, pounced on that thing early and were able to cash in. As far as a college football best bet for this week, I'm going to take you to Columbia, Missouri, and BP kind of hinted at where he was going in the Arkansas-Missouri game. Now, full disclosure here as we back 4-1-7 on the betting board as a 3-point underdog. Do shop around. There are some 3.5s at books that a lot of you guys will have access to. That was where the move came in. And I think BP hit on it, pretty soundly, talking about why Arkansas isn't getting enough respect in the betting market as they should be. Now, 3 again, you give up a little bit of value, but I think this closes comfortably below a field goal. As you dig into what Arkansas has accomplished this year and you go through the resume, yes, back in week 2 against Oklahoma State, they lost that game 39-31. And over the course of the regular season, that game really hasn't held up. But you dig into that box score, Arkansas absolutely dominated the Cowboys, and maybe it was a harbinger of things to come for the Pokes and all of the struggles they've had. Since that point in the season, you look at Arkansas's losses. Losing on a neutral against Texas A&M, the Aggies control their own destiny destiny to get to the SEC championship. Arkansas was blown out by an LSU team that was healthy at the time, 34-10. That's a little bit more of a problematic data point. The game against Ole Miss just stepped in above their heads, couldn't get a stop in the secondary, and then, of course, most recently, covered against the Texas Longhorns, but came up on the short end of a 20-10 loss. Meanwhile, their opponent this week in the Missouri Tigers, you go through their strength of schedule, and while Mizzou has put together a great 8-3 season, dealing with quarterback injuries as Brady Cook has returned for each of the last two, there's no question in terms of comparing the strength of schedule that these two teams have had to play in the SEC advantage Arkansas, and I think that's what's created a little bit of value in this particular number, especially knowing that you'll have some access to the 3.5, but for official grading purposes, we will call it a field goal. But the other thing that can't be ignored here, when you dig into some of the underlying metrics, this is an Arkansas team that has shown big play potential on the ground. You look at some of their EPA rushing stats, the explosive rushing capabilities that this group offers when they're healthy in the backfield, and they are an extremely difficult out. You dive into some of the Missouri defensive numbers, and we knew the Tigers were going to have a little bit of drop-off, so much so that they're outside the top 30 and top 40 in a lot of the key metrics when you're looking to try and identify a slight edge. Now, on the other side of the ball for Missouri, I know people are thinking, well, you just mentioned that Arkansas' secondary has been a little bit of a weakness, and against Luther Bird and Theo Weiss, that could pose some problems. The problem, though, for Missouri, however, has been a passing attack that has really lacked luster and pop. From an explosive pass percentage play standpoint, this is a bottom-tier offense by SEC standards, and there are some other disconcerting factors for a team that hasn't been able to consistently run the ball and find the big play capabilities that are there. So if Arkansas's defensive line can make Missouri a little bit more one-dimensional, I think they're able to pin their ears back, come after Brady Cook, and make life a little bit more difficult. The other thing that got us to the window here, making a case for Arkansas, all you have to do is hit the rewind button to what we saw transpire last year. And folks around the Arkansas program, including their head coach Sam Pittman, said it was arguably one of the lowest points of Pittman's 5-year tenure at Arkansas. Missouri, and I quote, beat the hell out of us last year. And while there are plenty of new faces inside the Hogs program, it's not lost on Arkansas that they found themselves down 41-0 at one point against the Missouri team. And to kind of build on what Pittman had said, quote, they're going to get tired of me by the time we get to week's end, but we can't have that kind of performance again. We have high respect because Missouri is a really good team, physical team, but we got all the motivation we need. We just got to go up there and play well. And when we dig a little bit deeper into what this rivalry has been, look, full credit to Missouri. They have dominated Arkansas big picture-wise, going 8-2 straight up against the rival for the Battle Line Trophy. But we look at how Arkansas has gone into Columbia and performed, coming up just short by 2 points back on November 25th, 2022, losing that game 29-27, and a track meet back on December 5th in 2020, dropping that decision 50-48. I think this is an Arkansas team that's a little bit more buttoned up. They're more dynamic offensively, and quite frankly, I think the Hogs defense will be a little bit overlooked as a unit in this game. So Arkansas, bet number 417 for those scoring at home. Our final regular season college football best bet. Do shop around for the 3.5, but we'll call 3 for official grading purposes. And ladies and gents, this is my time to hand the baton off, and much like a good bullpen coach, we'll go to our closer in Payne to break down all things NFL, and he gets the honors of taking you into the holiday weekend. And to echo some of Brad's sentiments, want to wish all of your families the happy and healthiest Thanksgiving. Enjoy quality time with your friends and family, and we're going to get you to the window with some winners, both in the college and NFL schedules. Payne, it's all yours, my friend.
Speaking of closers, we have thrown a little bit of a curveball this week with Thanksgiving and people being on the move, so we've each recorded our files individually. Listening to Brad's, my God, 65 games in 58 minutes. It was unbelievable to hear. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Todd came in middle relief, and we'll close this out with an NFL best bet. It's going to be very difficult to escape the talking point about Tua playing in cold weather. 0-4. It already started Tuesday morning. Stephen A. Smith on ESPN. Good Morning Football. Every national news outlet talking Thanksgiving football touched on this subject. Miami might as well not even show up. Now, you don't want to be completely dismissive of this, but the narrative is overblown at this point, especially without context. Yes, Tua is 0-4 straight up when temps are below 40, 1-3 against the spread. A 4-game sample size is quite literally irrelevant. Now, if you disagree and deem the cold temps and Tua being worth something, and you wanted to go about this the right way, you'd treat it like any other handicapping element and assess its value. Is it worth a quarter point, half a point, full point? Then figure out if a position is worth being taken. It's not just Tua in a game below 40 degrees, bet against him no matter what. The deeper context matters in my mind as well. Who has Tua played in these cold weather games? Oh, the Chiefs and Bills. So the best teams in the AFC during his NFL career. Last year's Super Bowl champion Chiefs in Arrowhead with 9 starters missing between offense and defense. The Bills, who have won 15 of the last 17 in their series against the Dolphins. Is it cold weather, or is just Buffalo having the Dolphins number? Right? When the 0-4 sample size is against the best teams in the league with the best quarterbacks in the league, it sounds like these games could have been played in freezing temps, Miami, Buffalo, Kansas City, or on Mars. If Miami loses this game Thursday night against the Packers, it's because they weren't able to take advantage of Jair Alexander being out. It's because the Packers were able to take advantage of the Dolphins not having Kendall Fuller. Because Miami won't be able to find their run game and take full advantage of that Packers weakness. But the media will tell you it's because Tua could not handle the cold weather again. Matchup-wise, we've seen the Dolphins' offense move to a quicker, shorter passing attack. In my mind, that's a material change that would likely help in weather conditions. Tua is getting rid of the ball in under 2.4 seconds, fastest in the league. It's a byproduct of not just the system change, but helping the Dolphins' offensive line, along with decreasing the risk of Tua getting hit and having the egg scrambled. The Packers' defense is extremely reliant on pressure. Green Bay allows almost 4 yards more per pass attempt when they do not get pressure. Tua has only been pressured on 21% of dropbacks. Very difficult to get pressure on Tua with that quick anticipatory release. The Packers are 27th in pass rush win rate. Rashawn Gary not having quite the season he's had the past 2 years. All signs, again, point to star corner Jair Alexander missing this game. Green Bay has struggled mightily with outside receivers in Jair Alexander's absence. We've also seen Jonnu Smith really be a factor in this new-look Dolphins offense. They did not have a pass-catching tight end the past few seasons. They have one. And the Packers are well below average in most key metrics defending tight ends. I'm also interested to see what blitzes Anthony Weaver dials up this week. It's been an area where Jordan Love has struggled so far this season. He's graded out QB 33 out of 39 qualifiers against the blitz. We know Anthony Weaver likes to dial up some exotic ones. From a price perspective, we're at the Dolphins plus 3.5. This is somewhat of a weird time to enter the market, as Brad has talked about earlier in the show. We've discussed multiple times. This is the 1 week where the public really has its say, especially with a standalone Thanksgiving game. This is the 1 week, whether it's NFL, college football, if you're waiting for that extra half tick, be patient. If you've missed a number, don't chase. It might come back to you. And so where I'm going with this is standalone game, Thanksgiving, Thursday night. Bettors are going to remember what they saw last, and that was Green Bay annihilate the 49ers without the realization that the 49ers are a team pro bettors sold this season, under an 11.5 wins. The 49ers are a team reliant on its star players. That's how they've built this roster. There's not a ton of depth. There's a lot of high-end, highly paid athletes. So when Brandon Allen starts at quarterback without Trent Williams at left tackle, that basically renders the 49ers offensive line in that bottom 5 conversation without Trent Williams. They had a banged-up Debo, a banged-up Kittle, no Nick Bosa or Charvarius Ward. The 49ers are an absolute shell of themselves. Does this have a chance to get to 4? I've seen weirder things unfold in this market. You go back to a Thanksgiving Thursday night football game between the Falcons and Saints and shit. We saw that thing move 2.5 points. It was wild. For the purpose of this show, we'll call it Miami Dolphins plus 3.5. That'll be the NFL best bet this week. Hope everyone has a great time with friends, family, and loved ones for Thanksgiving. Safe travels. Enjoy the largest party night of the year, but do it like an adult. Until next week.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.